There is a kind of love that never gets acknowledged. No card for it, no holiday, no moment where somebody looks you in the eye and says, "Thank you for staying." You just wake up every morning and choose it again, quietly, without applause. I did that for 14 years. And the boy I did it for looked me dead in the face and told me I was not worthy to be at his graduation. My name is Jacob Scott. I'm a truck driver out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. I haul freight across 4 states and sleep in rest stops off I-40. I don't own a suit that didn't come off a clearance rack at Dillard's. But for 14 years, I showed up for a boy who never once asked me to. And the night he told me to disappear from his graduation, I left something on that kitchen table that changed everything. Stay with me, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you will love it here. I met Betty at a church potluck in the fall of 2008. She brought a peach cobbler. I brought nothing because Michael told me it was a cookout, and Michael lies about everything, which is why he's been divorced 3 times. Betty laughed when I showed up empty-handed, and something about that laugh made me feel like I'd been standing in a cold room my whole life, and somebody finally cracked a window. She told me about Ryan on our second date. We were at a diner on College Avenue, and she set her coffee cup down very carefully, like she was diffusing something. "I have a son," she said. "He's 8. His name's Ryan. His daddy, his biological daddy, his name's Larry. Larry and we've been done for 3 years. But Larry's still in the picture." I nodded. "Okay, Jacob, I need you to understand what that means, before this goes any further." "It means you have a son," I said. "I heard you the first time." She looked at me for a long moment. Most men hear that and they leave. I'm still sitting here. I was. And I kept sitting there for 14 years. Ryan Arthur was 8 years old when I first met him. Small for his age, quiet in the way that makes you nervous, with his mama's eyes and his biological father's stubborn jaw. He shook my hand like a little old man when Betty introduced us, looked me dead in the eye, and then went straight back to his room without another word. Smart kid, I thought. He's already figured out that most men who come through that door don't stay. I decided, right then and there, that I was going to be the exception. I wasn't naive about what I was walking into. Betty was beautiful and funny and kind, and Ryan was a package deal, and I accepted that without conditions. What I didn't fully understand yet, what I wouldn't understand for years, was the quiet current running underneath that house, the one I couldn't see, the one pulling Ryan sideways every time I tried to reach him. I married Betty in the spring of 2010. Ryan was 10. He stood at the end of the aisle in a little beautiful suit and refused to smile for a single photograph, which honestly I respected. He wasn't pretending. Most adults spend their whole lives pretending. This kid was 10 years old and already had more backbone than half the men I'd met on the road. The first year was what I'd call a respectful standoff. I didn't push. I didn't try to be his buddy. I didn't do that thing some stepfathers do, showing up with gifts and enthusiasm like they're auditioning for a television commercial. I just lived in the house, did my share, and let Ryan watch me. I drove him to football practice when Betty had her evening shifts at the clinic. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd be parked outside that school at 5:15, engine running, radio on low. He'd climb in, drop his bag at his feet, and stare out the window the whole drive. 45 minutes of silence, twice a week, for 3 years. I'm a truck driver. I'm comfortable with silence. One Thursday in the fall, Ryan must have been about 12. He climbed into the truck and said, out of nowhere, "Coach is right. You don't even watch practice. I watched the first 10 minutes last week before you told me to stop hovering." He was quiet for a second. Then, "You can watch if you want." I don't care. That's the most generous thing he's ever said to me, I thought, and I will treasure it for the rest of my life. Out loud, I said, "Yeah, all right." He nodded. That was it. But I'm here to tell you, that Tuesday, I stood on that sideline in 40-degree weather in a denim jacket and watched that boy throw a football with the kind of focus that made me feel something I still don't have a word for. Pride, maybe. Or the closest thing to it that you're allowed to feel about somebody else's son. Here's what I didn't know. While I was building something with Ryan, one brick at a time, one Tuesday drive at a time, Betty was quietly, systematically pulling up the foundation behind me. Not out of cruelty. I want you to hold on to that, because this story is harder to carry if you make her a villain. Betty wasn't cruel. Betty was scared. And scared people do damage in slow motion, in ways they sometimes can't even see themselves doing. Here's what you need to understand about Betty Calloway before she became Betty Scott. She'd been left before. Larry Arthur walked out when Ryan was 5, packed his things on a Monday, had a new woman in Dallas by Thursday. Before Larry, there was a man named Dennis who lasted 11 months before he decided the responsibility of a relationship was incompatible with his personal freedom, which is a very long way of saying he wasn't ready to grow up. Betty had been through 2 men who looked permanent and turned out to be passing through. She had built scar tissue in the shape of a rule: don't let Ryan attach to someone who isn't going to stay. So when I showed up, steady, quiet, reliable in the way truck drivers are reliable, the way diesel engines are reliable, Betty watched me with hope in one hand and a countdown clock in the other. She wanted me to stay, but she didn't trust that I would, and she was not going to let her son fall for a man who might one day pack his things. So she started protecting him, quietly, surgically, the way only a mother who has been hurt knows how. When Ryan was 10 and starting to warm up to me, just barely, just at the edges, Betty would say things, not big things, little things, tiny seeds dropped into soft ground. Jacob works real hard, baby. Long trips. You know how it is when men are on the road that much, you can't really count on a schedule. When Ryan was 12 and I'd been at every single practice without missing one, she'd say, "Jacob's a good man, Ryan. I just don't want you to get too settled in, you know? Things change. People change. Just keep that in your back pocket." When Ryan was 15 and I heard him almost call me dad by accident one evening, and then catch himself and go red in the face, Betty took him aside that night. I don't know exactly what she said, but he never came close again. She wasn't trying to hurt me. I believe that with my whole chest. She was trying to protect Ryan from the specific heartbreak of loving a man who leaves. The devastating irony, the thing that still breaks me a little when I sit with it, is that I was the one man in Ryan's life who was categorically, constitutionally, stubbornly never going to leave. I was the permanent one, and she taught him to treat me like a temporary arrangement. Ryan grew up believing his distance from me was emotional intelligence, self-preservation. He was keeping himself safe. He had no idea he was living inside his mother's fear. I kept driving the truck, kept signing the field trip forms, kept showing up. Now I need to tell you about Tommy Hayes. Tommy Hayes and I went to high school together at Fayetteville High. We played ball, we got into trouble. We worked summer jobs side by side at a lumber yard on Dixon Street. I went into trucking after graduation. Tommy, who was always the smarter one, and who'd never let me forget it, got a scholarship to the University of Arkansas, then law school at Vanderbilt, and eventually came back to Fayetteville and built himself a firm. Hayes Greer and Associates. Family law, estate planning, civil litigation. We were the kind of friends that time doesn't erode, the kind where you can call at 11:30 at night and they pick up without being irritated about it, the kind that are rarer than people think. Ryan had been studying pre-law at the University of Arkansas. He was good, genuinely good. I knew because I'd listened to him practice arguments at the kitchen table when he thought I was just watching television. The boy had a mind built for it. He could take apart an argument the way I take apart an engine, methodical, patient, relentless. When Ryan was 19, I started talking to Tommy. Not asking, talking. I wasn't going to beg Tommy for a favor on behalf of a kid who'd never once called me anything warmer than Jacob. But I laid out the situation, told Tommy about Ryan's grades, his focus, what I'd seen of him. Tommy was quiet for a moment over his brisket sandwich. "How come you're doing this?" Tommy asked. "Because somebody should." Tommy looked at me for a long second. Then he nodded and said, "All right. When he graduates, you send me his transcripts. We'll talk." Over the next 3 years, I checked in with Tommy every few months, quietly, casually. Ryan was on the dean's list sophomore year. Ryan won a moot court competition junior year. I mentioned these things to Tommy the way you mention weather, just information, no pressure. Tommy kept nodding, kept listening. By the time Ryan was a senior, Tommy had quietly held a junior associate position open at Hayes Greer and Associates. Full salary, benefits, bar exam study leave built into the contract. He'd turned down 2 other candidates for it. When I asked him why, he said, "Because you've been hauling freight for 14 years and never asked me for anything. The least I can do is look at your kid." "He's not my kid," I almost said. I didn't. I also put a down payment on a car. Now you need to understand something about this part. I drive trucks for a living. I am not a wealthy man. That down payment came from 3 years of overtime runs, from missed holidays sitting in a truck stop in Memphis eating a vending machine sandwich, from saying no to a fishing trip to Table Rock Lake that Michael kept inviting me on, and that I genuinely, sincerely wanted to take. But I'd seen the Dodge Charger brochures. Ryan had been cutting them out of magazines since he was 16, dark blue ones specifically. He'd tack them up on his wall and then take them down when he thought I'd noticed, like caring about something was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. I bought that car 18 months before graduation and kept it at Tommy's house. I put everything, the offer letter, the car key, in a white envelope that I kept in the inside pocket of my coat. I told no one, not even Betty. June in Fayetteville is beautiful in the way that Arkansas summers always start out, before the humidity gets serious and turns the whole state into a warm, wet blanket. Ryan's graduation from the University of Arkansas was on a Saturday, clear sky, Bud Walton Arena. 22 years old, and he looked, crossing that stage, like a man who had finally figured out the shape of his own life. Larry was flying in from Dallas for the graduation and dinner. His first visit to Fayetteville in 2 years, because Larry Arthur's schedule was apparently incompatible with his own son's ordinary life, but very compatible with graduation dinners and the opportunity to be photographed being a proud father. Ryan was electric all afternoon, laughing, texting, checking his phone for Larry's flight updates every 12 minutes. The energy in the house was the kind that happens when someone's favorite person is coming. I was, very clearly, not that person. That was fine. I'd accepted that a long time ago. I was in the kitchen tidying up before we all left for the graduation, straightening chairs, wiping the counter, just staying useful, the way I always had. The envelope was in my coat pocket, hanging by the door. I was planning to give it to Ryan later at dinner. I heard him come down the stairs behind me. I turned around, smiling, ready to say something about how proud I was. Jacob. He said my name the way you say a word you've used so many times it's lost all its meaning. Hey, bud, you look sharp. I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made me set down the dish rag. The greatest gift you can give me today, he said quietly, almost carefully, like he'd rehearsed it, is to not come to my graduation. The kitchen went very still. You're not my real dad, he said. You're just Jacob. Then he straightened his blazer, and he walked back upstairs to finish getting ready. I stood there, just Jacob. I didn't move for a long moment. And then, because the universe apparently felt I hadn't absorbed enough for one evening, I looked up. Betty was standing in the hallway. She'd heard every word. I could see it in her face. The way she'd gone very still, the way she was looking at me with something that wasn't quite guilt, and wasn't quite sorry and wasn't quite brave enough to be either one. Our eyes met. 1 second. 2. She turned, and followed Ryan upstairs without making a sound. That was the moment I understood everything. Not Ryan's words. I'd been preparing, somewhere in the back of my mind, for Ryan's words since the day I married his mother. Kids say hard things. Kids shaped by fear and imperfect arrangements say harder things. That wasn't the wound. The wound was Betty's silence. 14 years of being the man in that house, fixing what broke, staying when it was hard, loving a child who had been quietly, carefully taught not to love me back. And she stood in that hallway and chose silence. I understood in that moment what I'd been too stubborn to fully name before. Ryan's distance wasn't entirely his own. It was planted, watered, tended by gentle, terrified hands. And Betty had stood in that hallway with a front row seat to everything she'd built, and still said nothing. I walked to my coat, reached into the pocket, took out the envelope. I set it on the kitchen table, set the car key on top, silver ring, just the one key, no fob, the way Ryan always said he'd want it, because he'd called keychains extra since he was 17. I had remembered that. I remembered everything about that boy, including the things he never knew I noticed. I placed Betty's letter beside it. Open, face up. I put on my coat. I did not slam the door. I pulled it shut behind me, quiet as a man who has made his peace, and I walked to my truck. I didn't leave town. I drove out to a spot I knew about 20 minutes outside of Fayetteville, a gravel pull-off where I used to go when the house felt too small for whatever I was carrying. I cut the engine, sat in the dark with the windows down and the river moving somewhere below me in the black. I wasn't running. I just needed somewhere quiet to put my head down for a minute. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it and drop your thoughts in the comments. While I sat by that spot, Ryan and Betty went to the graduation and dinner with Larry Arthur and other family members. They came home at midnight, laughing about something Larry had said. They walked into the kitchen, and then they saw the table. The light was still on. I'd left it on. The key. The 2 letters. The silence of a house missing the particular weight of a person who'd been in it. Ryan picked up his envelope first. Inside, a formal offer letter from Hayes, Greer and Associates. Ryan Arthur's full name printed at the top. Junior Associate. Starting salary. Full benefits. Bar exam study leave. A handwritten note from Tommy confirming the position had been held for 18 months. Waiting for this exact graduation. And at the bottom, in my handwriting, one line added before I left. The charger is in the driveway. The key is yours either way. So is the job. I've transferred my recommendation to Tommy directly. He'll treat you exactly as you deserve. Drive safe. Jacob. That was it. No guilt trip. No after everything I've done. No invoice for the overtime runs, the down payment, the Tuesday drives, the fever nights. Nothing that could be thrown back at me as manipulation or performance. Just the gift, delivered clean, and a door held open. Ryan set the letter down carefully, walked to the front door, opened it. The charger was there, dark blue, a single ribbon tied around the side mirror because Tommy's wife had insisted and I hadn't had the energy to argue. Ryan stood in that doorway for a long time. Betty's letter was different. Betty read hers standing at the kitchen table. She read it 4 times before her legs worked again. I know this because she told me, months later when enough had crumbled between them for honesty to finally have room to breathe. It said, Betty, I've known for a long time that you were afraid I'd leave. I understood it. You'd been left before, and you weren't going to let Ryan pay the price for trusting the wrong man again. I don't say this to accuse you. I say it because I think you need to hear that I saw what you were doing. And I stayed anyway. I stayed because I was never going to leave. Not ever. That was the one thing you were wrong about. Maybe the only thing. But it was the thing that cost Ryan the most. Ryan is 22 years old and doesn't fully know who he is yet. Because you needed him not to attach too deeply to me. He deserves the chance to figure that out now. The job at Tommy's firm is real. The car is real. The key is on the table. Tell Ryan the greatest gift I could give him was 14 years of showing up when no one asked me to, and never once making him feel like he owed me for it. The mortgage on this house is paid through December. That should give you enough time. Jacob Scott Ryan sat in that Charger for a long time. He did the math. Sat in the driver's seat with the offer letter in his lap and the key in his hand, and just did the math. 8 years old when I arrived. 14 years. The drives in the rain. The fever nights. The things I'd never said and never demanded credit for. And he remembered something. When Ryan was 12, we'd been watching a football game together. One of those rare Saturdays when Ryan had allowed me to exist in the same room without making it feel like a hostage situation. At halftime, I'd said something offhand about how I wasn't going anywhere. Ryan assumed I meant I wasn't leaving for the second half of the game. Sitting in that Charger at midnight, Ryan realized I had not been talking about the game. He went inside and found Betty still at the kitchen table. He didn't scream. He's not built for tell you something. He just sat down across from her and asked quietly, "Why did you always do that? The things you'd say. About not getting too settled. About things changing." Betty tried to hold it together. She's good at that. She's had a lot of practice. But Ryan is going to be a lawyer. He knows how to wait someone out. She broke before he did. She told him. Not everything at once. She'd need months to get it all out. And even then she'd have to hand him pieces one at a time like they were fragile. But she told him enough. About the fear. About Larry leaving. About Dennis before Larry. About building a wall around Ryan's heart with her bare hands because she could not survive watching her son attached to a man who might leave. And how she'd been so convinced for so many years that I eventually would. Ryan went very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked one question she could not answer. Did he know? The whole time, did Jacob know what you were doing? Betty opened her mouth, closed it, because the honest answer was yes. By the end, I knew. I'd pieced it together over years of watching, the way you figure out what's wrong with an engine by listening long enough. And I had said nothing and done nothing except keep showing up. Because what was I going to do? Blow up Ryan's sense of safety? Expose his mother? Punish a child for decisions adults had made around him? No, I did what I always did. I drove to Tommy, I made the calls, I put the down payment on the car. Betty couldn't find words for any of that. So Ryan got up, took the key, and went back outside. He sat in that Charger until the sun started thinking about coming up. Ryan started at Hayes, Greer and Associates 8 weeks after graduation. His first day, Tommy walked a small framed photograph to his office himself. Didn't send anyone. Brought it personally, set it on the desk and said, "Jacob dropped this off a long time ago. Said to give it to you when the time was right." Then he walked out without another word, because Tommy Hayes has always had excellent instincts for when to leave a room. The photograph was from the Benton County Fair. Ryan at 11 years old, mid-laugh on a ride, face wide open with the kind of joy children forget they're capable of. And to the left, barely in frame, catching him in that moment without Ryan knowing he was being photographed, me, watching him with unmistakable pride. Ryan set it on his desk, stared at it for a while. Then he picked up his phone. I was parked at a rest stop on I-49 outside of Alma, Arkansas, eating a gas station sandwich I would not recommend to anyone I liked. I saw his name on the screen. Sat with it for one full ring. 2. I picked up. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Ryan said, "I think I owe you a dinner. I'm sorry I let the silence breathe for just a second." Then, "I know a good place you're buying. I want to tell you about that laugh because it matters. It wasn't polite, and it wasn't entirely relieved, though relief was in it. It was the laugh of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has just finally set it down. The muscles that were holding it don't quite know what to do with themselves. It sounded, for the first time in all the years I'd known him, like he was free." We met at Penguin Ed's. Ryan was there before me, which surprised me until I realized it shouldn't have. He'd had 8 weeks to prepare for this conversation. He stood up when I walked in, didn't shake my hand, hugged me. Stiff, a little. Ryan Arthur is not a man built for easy warmth and probably never will be. And I love that about him. I always have. But it was real, present. His hands on my back like he was making sure I was actually there. We sat down, we ordered. We talked for 3 hours. I'm not going to give you every word, because some things belong to the table they happened at. But somewhere around the second cup of coffee, Ryan looked at me and said, "Why didn't you ever say anything? About what you knew, about what she was doing?" I thought about it. "Because you didn't need me to be right," I said. "You needed me to be there." He looked at his cup, nodded slowly, then, quietly, like it cost him something to say it, "You were there." I was. The photograph from the Benton County Fair is still on Ryan's desk at Hayes, Greer and Associates. Tommy told me Ryan has never moved it. New files come and go. Stacks of paperwork shift around it. The photograph stays exactly where Tommy set it on day 1. I keep a copy in my truck cab, tucked above the visor on the passenger side, where I can see it when I pull the sun guard down on a bright Arkansas morning heading east on I-40. Ryan, 11 years old, mid-laugh on a ride he was too proud to admit he wanted to go on. Me, just outside the frame, watching him with something I didn't have a name for then. I have a name for it now. Betty and I have talked. More than I expected, more than either of us was ready for, she cried. I came close more than once. What I'll tell you is this: she made her choices out of fear, and fear held long enough becomes the very thing you were afraid of. She was so terrified of losing another man that she created a distance she couldn't close, and she held on to it until the one person who was genuinely never going to leave walked out to clear his head and think about 14 years of his life. I don't carry bitterness. Bitterness is heavy, and I drive trucks for a living. I can't afford extra weight. Ryan and I meet for lunch once a month now. Sometimes Penguin Ed's, sometimes somewhere new he's found and wants to show me. He picks up the check most times, working through what he calls the backlog, and I let him because it makes him feel better and because the places he picks have genuinely excellent food. I told him once he was bad at math. He said I shouldn't have let him fail his 3rd grade multiplication test then. "I drove you to every tutoring session," I said. He grinned at his coffee cup. "Yeah," he said, "you did." He's going to be a great lawyer, the kind that actually listens, which turns out to be the rarest kind. I don't know where he got that from. Actually, I might have some idea. That's my son. The DNA never matched. Every single other thing did. And sometimes pulling out of a truck stop at 4 in the morning with 800 miles ahead of me and the Arkansas sky going purple at the edges, I think about a quiet 8-year-old who shook my hand like a little old man and went straight back to his room. And I think, I'm glad I stayed. I never needed him to call me Dad. I want you to know that before anything else, I never needed the title, never asked for the credit, never once put my hand out for something in return. All I needed, the only thing I ever needed, was to know that when it was over, he'd remember that I was there, that somebody showed up, that it meant something to somebody. It didn't go that way. Not at first. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family stories. I will see you on the next one.